before it goes in and it's too small. Whoa!
Not going.
Bro. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, another engine on two wheels here, and welcome to another episode of Wrecked Bike Rebuild Garge, the show where my friends and I build motorcycles, then we give them away. So, in today's episode, this engine is not the CBR 1000, this is our CBR 600. Yes, we are doing 3 CBRs in one season of Wrecked Bike Rebuild Garage, and my God, was that a bad idea. In today's video, we have this 40,000 miles.
Plus.
Yeah, something like that. A lot of miles, and at this point in the life of an engine, we got to do a valve check.
At least.
You guys have been really enjoying us deep diving into engine stuff. So with Brian's knowledge and my stupidity combined, we are going to do an in-depth guide of how to check your valves in today's episode. The goal of today's episode, one, is to check the valves, do all the stuff we got to do on our build end, but we want this episode to end with you guys going from having no idea how to do a valve check to being able to at least have an understanding of either what you're going to have to do or what a tech would have to do when you take this stuff in. If you guys want to support our show and help us build these bikes that we eventually give away, you actually also get a chance to win the motorcycles. Top link down below, Wrecked Bike Rebuild Garage Patreon page. That is the only way we're able to do this show. So if you guys are getting any value out of these videos, you're learning all of this stuff out of, where's this man? This man's head. Consider supporting the show. We really appreciate it. So Brian, we got a tipped over, absolutely disgusting engine.
Yeah, it's kind of grimy.
It is kind of gross, but if we're only doing valve stuff, we're not doing the cleaning up today. What's our first step?
So just to make it easier for our friends here on Patreon and YouTube
We
to
do
be
have an
able
overhead
to
cam. Check that out, guys.
to be able to see everything going on real well, I'd like to get this engine so we can tip it flat and it'll stand up and not wiggle around and do all that stuff. So I think first we're going to remove the oil pan. Now this is some stuff that we were going to do anyway to inspect the pickup and the oil pump and stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and take the pan off, take the oil pickup off, anything else we need to take off so we can lay the engine flat on the bottom so it'll be nice and stable for you guys. So we're going to start there. Chase, move your face.
Get all of your OEM parts at Revzilla.com. The link down below.
It doesn't measure bars?
It's called a pressometer.
Pressometer. Yes. What kind of ometer is it? A pressometer. That makes sense to me.
I'm covering his ears. You can't hear this anymore.
All right, guys, so let me show you guys, we have the engine, we basically have a flat spot now. So Brian, we took a lot of stuff off. What are we looking at here that we removed from the engine thus far?
Okay. So what we did is we removed everything necessary so we can lay the engine flat so we can work on the top half of it.
Right, we're gonna be moving the engine up this way in a
So
second.
the first thing we removed was our oil pan.
Okay.
We also removed the oil cooler, the water pump, and then once we got the pan off, all this stuff off, we took off the oil feed pipe, the oil pressure regulator, and the oil pickup screen.
Also, as a note, you guys probably noticed this in the footage. Look at that. That is where the oil, where did the oil from there? That was from the screen that was there?
That came out of the screen and out of the oil feed line.
You guys notice anything?
No metal.
No metal. You don't notice anything because how excited we were that there was no metal in there.
Engine, but she's also the cleanest.
She's somehow the dirtiest
Dirty
and the
on the
cleanest
outside
engine.
and clean on the inside.
Like I like them.
I never thought I would be so happy to see oil come out of an engine and be able to be like, hey, there's no metal fragments. So this is looking good, right? This engine, compared to the other
So far,
ones,
so good.
is our best one.
And I'm very happy that the oil pump setup is a duplicate of what's in the 1000, so we'll be able to remove this oil pump without taking the rest of the machine apart, which is fantastic.
Something we won't do today, but we will get to
Correct.
eventually.
You know, this thing's got 40,000+ miles on it, so while we're here, to not replace the oil pump
Be a
doesn't really
travesty.
make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
So we'll be doing, you know, little stuff, pressure regulator, pickup screen, oil pump. We're gonna do the clutch pack, just because why not? 40,000+ miles, don't know when it was done, and this is going to be a bike that's gonna be on the track, so a nice fresh clutch would be good. We are going to continue on from here. We're going to move on to the cylinder head, and we're going to inspect these valves and make sure all of our clearances are right, so this thing runs at tip-top shape down the front straight.
Absolutely. And if you guys are curious, Chase, why the hell are you here? I feel like I'm here to help translate Brian's level of knowledge for a lot of you guys out there that are probably at my level, where you just don't know. Brian doesn't know what people don't know, and I don't know anything. So I am here as a translator of Brian's knowledge to consumable levels. So if you guys are curious why there's a stupid guy asking questions like, why is he in the garage? That's why I'm here. With that being said, and everybody's jobs being laid out, let's get to valves.
So these are your cam drive gears, intake cam, exhaust cam. All your throttle bodies and stuff go here, airbox, all that stuff. Your exhaust pipes come out of here and take off down the side of your bike. This is pretty much the orientation you would see the engine in the frame.
Okay.
The way it sits right now, the angle, the way everything is lined up, they pretty much set these things fairly level, or to the flatness of the bottom of the engine cases. They set them fairly level in the frame.
Bike head is facing in this direction.
Faces forward, and it's always tilted forward just a bit. It helps
the
with
engine
the
is?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. The cylinders kind of, they come out on this sort of an angle. You know, they're not straight up and down. They kind of come out this way. Makes room for more of the intake. It also takes the weight and it hangs it a little bit further forward towards the front wheel.
Right.
So you get more traction for cornering and all that stuff.
And everything we're doing today, you could do with it inside of the
So,
frame.
you know, we took apart that bike. We took the engine out of that bike because we're going to be powder coating the frame, but we're not going to be rebuilding the engine. We're just going to do some heavy maintenance to it. While it's out, we're going to show you some of these maintenance things that need to be done on your machine, and typically this is done with the engine in the frame. We are going to show it to you now out of the frame so you could see everything really well. If you could imagine you having the frame wrapped around this thing and all the electronics and hoses and everything hanging over it, how much more difficult it would be to see all this. You know, it's much easier for you guys to be able to see everything that would need to be done for a valve inspection. One, either so you can do it yourself or at least give it a shot yourself. I suggest if you're going to start it, finish it. Don't start it and not finish it. And if you're not confident enough to do it yourself, then don't start it, because you could make things go bang if you do this wrong. So, and then the other reason is so you know what a technician has to go ahead and do when you drop your bike off for a valve inspection. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be removed from the motorcycle just to get to the point where you can get the valve cover off. And then the space that you need to work in while it's still in the frame is extremely tight. So it takes a long time. It is tedious work. There's lots of magnets and flashlights and odd angles to be able to see all the stuff that we could see very easily while the engine is out of the frame.
I'm still shocked that as a tech, you would just do this in the frame.
It takes far too long to drain all the fluids out of it, remove all the hoses. Because if you do this, then you need to replace all the exhaust gaskets. You need to, you know what I mean? Because you're taking the exhaust system off to get the engine out of the frame. Far, far too much work to take the engine out of the frame to do this than it is to spend the time kind of fighting with it.
Right.
You know,
the fight is worth
the fight is worth
opposite amount of time.
Now, I'm the type of technician that I don't like to fight with things, and I would much rather take them apart than to fight in a little space. But this is something I would absolutely do in the frame.
Because it's so gross how much work.
I mean, the amount of work that would need to be, it would double the price.
It would also cost more, because you'd have to replace stuff that you shouldn't have had to replace.
It would absolutely double the price of the job for the customer if you tried to remove the engine to do that work. So we need to open up this cover right here. This gives us access to turn the crankshaft so we can turn the cams.
Yeah, why are the spark plugs so dirty?
Yeah, either the air filter was real dirty for a while, or it's burning a tiny bit of oil. Doesn't really look like oil on here, so.
Are any of those issues we should be worried about and or looking?
I mean, if it was, if there was like burnt oil on this, we'd be concerned.
But you can't.
But
see
it's
any
not. Burnt oil comes out. It almost looks like they almost turn into like little stones, almost like carbon, you know. And it would collect in here, and that would be burnt oil, or it would be wet. You know what I mean? Something like that.
So we're not
concerned. No, we just it needs a good tuning, and it could also be because the valves are tight. If the valves are not where they need to be, then the thing won't run right, and you'll have one cylinder that's lean, one cylinder that's rich because the valves aren't opening for.
We're finding that out today.
Yes. So this is how far the cylinder head needs to be uncovered to inspect your clearances.
Okay.
Okay, so the clearance that we're referring to is the space in between the bottom, this is the bottom of the cam lobe,
Okay.
okay, and the lifter for the valve, which is the bucket.
Right.
Remember all the buckets we pulled out?
Yeah, we have them all organized.
Okay, so there's supposed to be an extremely small clearance in between the bottom of the camshaft,
Right.
or the base of the cam, and the bucket when the cam is in that position.
Okay, so I can see you can get to it.
Yeah, so imagine working this thing in the frame,
Oh my God.
and you're in here trying to fit feeler gauges in this while the engine's still in the frame. It's quite fiddly.
And we'll
Now,
get into
these are feeler gauges. So these are all. Let's see if the camera can. Can you get the numbers?
Might be easier to get on. I got it. Oh, you're on 35.
Okay. So the one that Luke just focused on is 0.18 millimeters.
Right.
That's how thick that piece of metal is. It's less than 0.2 of a millimeter thick.
These are essentially flat rulers for
Yes.
thickness.
That's exactly what they are. Okay, they're all stamped a different size for a different thickness. Okay.
And this tool is not expensive. These,
Now you can get feeler gauges. They're probably like $20.
right, and
Between like 20 and 50 for like a really big kit.
right, and these are brand new because I've seen ones that you've used, and
They're all
are
wiped out. So now we have the side of the engine case open,
yes.
so we can access the end of the crankshaft, so we can turn the motor over, because you can see this lobe is up. We can measure this one, but this lobe is down. You can't measure it because it's got the valve open.
So you need to measure it when the egg-shaped
when the
top
lobes
is
are
facing
pointing up.
Okay.
So when the lobes are pointing up, the valves are closed.
Okay.
All right, the lobes are pointing up, the valves are up.
Right,
And they're
because
closed up against the cylinder head,
right.
and then the cam sits above it, and there should be that little tiny gap in between the two.
Closed meaning that piece at the bottom is all the way up.
Yep. So
Okay.
this valve is closed.
Right.
That valve is open.
Okay, got it.
Good?
Yep. So it needs to look like an egg for you to.
Yeah, you need to see the
test.
sharp point on
Right.
it. You know, if you want to call that a sharp point, but you need to see the high spot sticking up,
Got it. Okay.
and then your valve is closed. So not everybody does things the way that I do. I do things my own way. This is not how the book tells you to do it. The way the book would tell you to do it would be to set the number 1 cylinder at top dead center. And then you would measure all the valves for cylinder 1. And then there would be at least one more valve where you can get intake or exhaust. And you would measure all the clearances you can at once. All the valves that are closed, they
Right.
tell you to measure at once. I do one at a time.
So when you say get the valve at or the cylinder at top dead center, how do you get cylinder 1 at top dead center?
So there is a mark on the side over here
T
on the case.
or whatever.
Yes.
And but that's only for one cylinder.
That's for number 1.
So how do you know when number 2 is top dead
Okay.
center?
Good question. You could physically see which ones are closed and which ones are open.
Right.
So if you're not using the marks on the side,
You just use.
so what they'll tell you in the manual is be set at the top dead center, measure what you can, turn the engine 180 degrees, and measure the rest.
Got it. Okay.
I like to do one at a time because it makes it easier for me to write down all my clearances.
So you're just visually then being like, okay, I can see
Lobes
that
are
this
up,
one's-
I can measure the clearances.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to do now. So this little nick right there is the mark in the cover that you have to line up the T with the slash mark.
So Brian, when you're talking about number of cylinders, how do you know which cylinder is number 1? How do you know to start from the left or right to left?
So it depends on the manufacturer.
Okay. Is this like a book thing, like get the manual and they'll tell you? or-
Absolutely. If you have a manual, you would want a manual to do this, honestly.
Nobody should do this based on this video alone, even if they
You
have.
still need a manual. One, you need to know the clearances.
Right.
2, once you get your clearances, if there are any valves that need to be adjusted, you need the book to tell you how to set everything up so you can get the cams out.
Right.
And then once you get the cams out, you're going to need to torque everything back down the spec.
Right. So this is literally just a general guide of,
Yes, of inspection.
how to inspect.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Some manufacturers say cylinder 1 is the furthest to the left.
Okay.
And some manufacturers will say cylinder number 1 is the one closest to the cam chain.
Okay.
So whichever your book says to do is how you do it. Can you see in there? Right, so there's the F,
Yep.
there's the T. So right now we have the line next to the T lined up with that little nick in the cover. The lobes are out. The small spot is down on the against the bucket, so we can measure
On both the intake and exhaust.
and exhaust. So we can measure these now. Okay. Okay, 3 fits. Now what I'm looking for is I'm going to go one at a time until I find the one that doesn't go in. I'm going to keep
Size.
putting feeler gauges in until it doesn't go.
Okay.
And then whatever was before the one that didn't go is the gap.
Got it.
Okay. That's 4. That's 5. That's 6. Clearances are getting big. So this is 7. Let's see if the 7 goes. Okay, 7 fits. And I think that's going to be the last one. I don't think the 8 is going to go. Okay, so our clearance is 7 thousandths. I set this up earlier. Thank you, Luke, for writing in some bullshit.
No problem.
So that was cylinder number 1. Cylinder 1. That was the exhaust sides, valves 1 and 2.
Okay.
And they were both .007.
This is what somebody would have to have, that or a piece of paper.
Yeah, something to write the numbers down because you're not going to memorize it.
Right.
You know, after you can't memorize 16 10,000ths of an inch measurements. You know, I mean, there's a pretty good chance you're going to mess that one up at some point.
I don't even know what you just said. So when you're pushing these feeler gauges into the opening, how would you describe the level of pressure that you're looking for? Is it like no pressure?
You're looking for a firm drag.
a firm drag.
Do you want to feel it?
Yes.
And then maybe you'll be able to...
Yeah, let me feel what the size under and then the right size is. I've learned this with a lot of motorcycle stuff that Brian has taught us.
And
a
it
lot
comes
of
to
motorcycle
feel.
stuff is feel, and feel is very hard to translate to these guys.
Absolutely.
So
Once you get a feel for it, you'll be able to put it in different words.
So I've got 8, 7, 6, and 5.
Thousandths of an inch.
Thousandths of an inch. You said 6 and 7 feel about where they should
They're
be.
close to each other. That's why I always like to go to the next one to see where it's at.
Right, you have to go to the number and past to know that that was the number.
Correct.
And I'm just kind of like pushing this thing
Yep.
underneath
You
the
move those
load.
wherever you want. Get them out of your way so you have the one that you need, you know, and just slide it. Go right along, and you can. Okay, there you go, right there.
Okay, there's very little resistance
Okay,
with
now
that.
try the next one.
All right, so now I'm going to 6. Okay, so I would describe that as smooth resistance. There's
Okay.
resistance, but I can still smoothly go in and out.
Okay, go to the next one.
Going to 7. All right, 7. I feel like I'm
Now,
having to push it in.
now
there.
that's the firm drag that I was referring to.
Okay, so you should feel like you're having to push it in, but once it's in, you should be able to
And then
just
you'll feel it sliding in between the
yes.
two parts.
So
Okay.
8.
Now, that one, go ahead and push it in, it'll go. That's too,
Yeah.
That's too tight.
So this is gonna be hard because I would say if I was doing this, like 7 is the first one that feels too tight.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because 6 doesn't have a lot of drag.
So if you think it feels too tight, you go to the next one. Okay?
Gotcha.
If you go to the next one, and the next one goes in, but it's even tighter,
Right.
then you know you need to back up. Or if it doesn't go in, then you know that that one's there.
So 6,
Now-
6 is easily going in there, and 7's the first one where I have to like
It's firm.
do an initial push
Yes.
in.
Okay.
But I mean, like when 7's in there, it's still like I feel like it's smooth, whereas 8,
It's tight.
yeah, yeah, it's a weird thing. So you go to the one that has the initial like resistance, and then if you go to the next one, it's like really hard to go in.
Right. Most of the time, when you get the one that has resistance, when you go to the next one, it doesn't go.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
the actual clearances are going to be between those two,
Between 7 and 8.
between 7 thousandths and 8 thousandths.
Yeah, I keep saying 7
Yeah.
and 8. I'm meaning 7 thousandths and 8 thousandths.
Yep. Yeah. So the actual clearance between those two is somewhere between those two.
Okay. So now we know they are. I mean, so this tells us that these are currently spec'd to between 7 and 8 thousand, right?
Right now, the clearance is between 7 and 8 thousandths.
Right. So now our next move is to do this on all of them, get the numbers, and then reference that with what the spec is supposed to be.
Correct. And then once we have the spec, now the spec will be a bubble.
Okay.
It's not an exact number. It's a between here and here.
Okay.
Okay. So let's just, for instance, say that the spec is between 5 and 7 thousandths.
Right.
Okay. That would mean that our 7 thousandths clearance is within spec.
Got it.
I personally, if I'm going to remove the camshafts to change any shims, to change any clearances, if I have specs that are like that are at the very top of their scale, I'll adjust them.
Because you're already here, you've gone through the whole process.
They're already out. You know, you may as well go ahead and adjust them, and that will make sure that there's more longevity between the next valve inspection.
Right.
Otherwise, you could get to the point where your valves will now be out of spec before you get to your next inspection.
All right, so now we are going to montage as we do a lot of this.
Right, so same process for all the valves. After we finish this cylinder, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the engine until we get the cam lobes to look just like these, and we'll do the next one, and we'll work our way down. One more thing before we get to background music, the intake spec is always smaller than the exhaust, and there's a reason for that. The exhaust side of the engine is always hotter, so those valves will expand more.
And that gives it room to...
And that gives it more room for expansion from the heat. And typically your intake valves and your exhaust valves are made of a different material. And usually they expand at different rates.
Okay.
So they'll work that into the spec as well. So being that the intakes are always going to be tighter than the exhaust, we're going to start with a much smaller feeler gauge on the other side.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with the 3, and we'll see where we're at from there.
4 goes in, and it's too small. Whoa!
Not going.
Bro. That's only a 1 change though.
Right, so the difference between those two is 10,000ths of an inch. So you put in, or
No. Look.
I've been stuck. Oh, they're stuck together.
Oh, I was gonna say.
That happens too.
Yeah, it does too.
Because they're covered in oil.
No, this is. It was shocking though. Like,
And they're so thin, it's hard to tell. So you gotta be real careful about that.
this is feeling. Dude, I was about to be like, what is life? 6 is that point of like I have to push it in, but it'll go in and feel right.
Okay.
I think so. So
Let's see where you're at. Okay, 6 goes in. So
Right.
you always want to go to the next one to see.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys on the camera hear some just odd crunching, that would be our local etymologist, Luke, testing out a sample of Chipotle.
Yeah, I would call that a 6. Okay.
Do you want me
So
to
you want to write that one down?
So that was the intake.
Cylinder 1. Luke.
So, guys, Brian just got done checking all of them. Those are all our numbers. And while Brian was checking, we had Bo over here. Oh, you've already cut down. So you were looking up. You looked up the service manual, and do you remember? Oh wait, we put it over
Yeah,
here.
we put up there.
So, intakes for spec is between. This is the bubble Brian was talking about. 0.007 to 0.009
Inches.
On the exhaust side, this is that different materials, exhaust is heated up, so you have to give some expansion space. Spec is 0.010 to 0.012. Ain't near one of them in spec. All right, going back, intake 0.7 to 0.007, 0.009. So a lot of these are 7s. But you said since those are at the bottom of the spec, you would adjust them differently
I would.
because we're here.
I would. I mean, all the exhausts are coming out. A couple of the intakes are tight. So we need to replace all. And I'm saying replace, and you guys will understand in a minute. I'm going to continue using the words that I'm using, but we're going to replace all the exhaust shims
Okay.
for sure. And then at least 2 of the intake shims because they're not in spec. Now, here's a little bit of play on that. So the spec is there. It gives you that bubble, right?
Yes.
Now, if you look at it from this perspective, the tighter the space is, the higher or the further the valve will open.
Okay.
Now, we're only talking about 1,000ths of an inch. It's not a huge difference.
Right.
But when you're setting up a race engine, you want your valves to open as far as you can get them to open.
Why is that?
Because the further the valves open, the more intake you get into the cylinder and the more exhaust gets out of the cylinder. It's like, do you crack the door open or do you open it all the way?
Right.
Do you open the door to 80 degrees or do you open the door to 90 degrees? If you open the door to 90 degrees, you can fit bigger furniture through it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's kind of where we're looking at. We want to open that valve door as far as we can open it
Okay.
without causing any sort of damage.
So we can get the most furniture inside.
Exactly. So we get the most furniture inside the engine to burn and make power.
Is there anything else to inspect that you would do as a technician during a valve inspection job?
You always want to look to see if there's any wear damage on anything. So as you're turning these cam lobes around, you always want to look at the lobes and see if any of the lobes have been worn out or scored or damaged in any way.
Is that the type of situation where you're looking for like marring or scratches
here,
or?
and you can see a little bit of wear on it, right?
Yeah,
Right, you can see just a tiny bit of wear. This part doesn't touch the bucket or the lifter.
Right.
Okay, so it's going to have no marks on it. So when the camshaft is brand new, that's what this surface looks like. As it wears, as it comes through and it rubs, you'll see that it'll make just slight wear marks. Those are fine. This is
okay.
normal wear.
Got it.
Okay, I would not be concerned about any of the cam lobes in here.
Okay.
So as I was doing this, I was taking a look at each lobe. I did not mention it, but I did take a look.
That's just something you naturally do.
Yep, ingrained in me to do as soon as I open stuff like this up is to inspect it for any sort of damage.
Right. And have you noticed anything?
Nope,
thus
everything
far?
looks good. I'm happy about what's in here. Everything looks nice and clean. There's no gunk. There's no collection. It did smell dirty
Right.
when we opened it, but I don't see any collection of any like tar or anything in the motor. So this thing has been obviously it's got 40,000+ miles on it. None of the spark plugs look different than any of the other spark plugs. They all look good. All of the valves are pretty much exactly where they are from one to the next to the next. So this thing was well maintained its entire life. It had oil changes done, and it probably had air filters done when it needed to be done. Maybe, you know, at this point all the exhaust valves are tight. It wasn't running as optimally as it could, so that's why our spark plugs look a bit dark.
Okay.
That could be one of the reasons. I can't tell you 100% why, but that could be one of the reasons why our spark plugs look dark. Everything here makes sense, and it's really all maintenance, and we're going to maintain this thing. It's going to be a nice motor.
Awesome. Do you were you surprised after the last two motors that we've gone
Nah,
through?
because this one ran, you know, this one was a fine running. We
Right.
knew it was,
just
and
down.
if Honda motors aren't blown up, they're good.
Right.
You know, so
Other than the visual inspection of
engines.
Correct.
Thank you.
Is there anything else as a tech you do when somebody, because like if somebody brings in for an inspection, you literally just inspect and then
I mean,
tell
you have,
them.
if you're going to the point where you're doing a valve inspection, that's not the only thing you're doing. That's a full service.
Oh, okay.
So we're talking.
So nobody brings in just for a valve inspection.
Every now and again, you'll have somebody do that because they do the rest of their maintenance themselves.
So is that a way as a technician you kind of know that they do some DIY at their house?
No,
Like
I
do it
mean,
themselves?
it's very rare for somebody to come in and be like, yeah, can you guys just do a valve inspection? And not be the guy that is
Yeah.
in the shop frequently asking questions about stuff.
Oh, because the same
know.
guy would have. Okay, got
Yep,
it.
you know, usually that's the case. Sometimes, you know, these people, they know what they're doing, but they don't want to go this far. This is a lot of work.
Yeah.
You know, and you'll see how tedious this gets when we have to remove the camshafts to get to the shims, to replace the shims to change the clearances. This is not a physical adjustment of parts. This is a physical replacement of parts to give us the clearances we need.
Okay, so a valve adjustment is replacing parts. You're not adjusting anything.
So when you go to the shop and you ask for a valve inspection, they'll inspect all the valves, okay? That's one price.
Okay.
If the valves need to be adjusted, you get the adjustment price, which is more labor on top of it.
See, the word adjustment is not a great word.
That's why you say it's an inspection, and then if you inspect it and they're out of spec, then it requires an adjustment.
But adjustment makes it sound like you're tweaking
Tightening
some
something.
stuff somewhere.
Now, technically, you are tweaking things, but to tweak it, it's a physical part. Hold on. We could actually explain this without taking any more of this engine apart because we have the parts for the 1000 over there in that bin. These are all of the lifters or buckets and shims from our 1000 motor. I'm gonna crack this open. I'm gonna pull one of these out. Okay, so this is your bucket or lifter. Those sit underneath each one of these lobes for the cam. That's what the camshaft rides on. So when the cam comes around, this high spot of the cam comes around, it pushes that bucket down, and then all the other valve stuff is underneath it, right? We did that with the other motor.
Right.
Okay, so now we're gonna continue on with the explanation here. This is a bucket for the 1000. This is pretty much what any bucket in any shim under bucket. So if you ever hear anyone refer to an engine as shim under bucket, this is what they're referring to.
Okay.
This is the bucket. So inside that bucket is that little nipple. That little nipple is a resting or rubbing point. This is the shim. Now, that little shim sits on top of the valve, and then the bucket slides over the spring and the valve, and that little nipple inside rests on top of that spring. Or, I'm sorry, rests on top of that shim. To change the clearance, you need to change the shim.
Oh, so that's the only piece that changes.
This is the part that gets changed when you have your valves adjusted. Usually when you buy shims, you buy a shim kit,
Oh, okay.
and it'll have 30 different sizes, and there'll be 5 of each or something like that.
So is the shim that goes into the 600 the same type shim that goes in a 1000?
Yes.
Or are there any types of different shims?
There
other than-
are 2 different size diameter shims for Japanese motorcycles.
Japanese in general.
So out of the 4 major Japanese brands, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, there are 2 different size shims for a now up-to-date inline 4-cylinder engine. Now, typically, Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki all use the same diameter shim, and Suzuki uses a slightly larger diameter shim. The shims are the same price, whether they're, I forget what size this shim is, but I'm almost positive that the Suzuki shims are 7.5 millimeter in diameter.
Okay.
And I think these are 5.
Right.
I don't know, don't quote me on that. I'm shooting
Just
from the
shooting
hip,
it out.
and I don't remember exactly. So if you own a Honda, a Yamaha, and a Kawasaki, you only have to buy one shim kit. And those shims will fit diameter-wise onto your motor. If you have a Suzuki, you only have to buy one shim kit. So all of our valves, for the most part, are out of spec. Some of these that are right at the lower end of the spec, we could leave them there so there's a little extra lift. I would actually try and get those specs like in the middle. And that's really where you want to set them, is you want to set them in the middle of the spec. If anything wears, either so it's tight or it's loose, you have some room either direction.
So is our next move to order a shim kit?
We could either order a shim kit, or we can remove all the shims. And let me get back to this again real quick so I can show you this.
You guys saw that little eat Brian grin, right? That's
This
Brian
is where
getting excited.
this is where things get a little interesting. Okay.
God.
So on these shims, when they're brand new, they are laser etched to the size.
Okay.
Let's see if there's actually left on here. After they've been ridden for 40,000 miles, that laser etching is usually gone.
Right.
Now this particular one, you can see it. It's still on here. And this is a 208.
Okay.
So it's 2.08 millimeters thick.
Okay.
When you buy a shim, your shims only come in half sizes. What I mean by half sizes is you'll get a 205 and then a 210.
Okay.
You won't get a 208.
Right.
The only way you can get those shims is from the manufacturer, and they don't sell them individually. They only come in the engines. Now, when they come from the manufacturer, they set them to an exacting spec. Every motor's got the same exact spec, dead smack in the middle of the spec.
Right.
So they will have a 208, a 209, a 210, a 211,
'Cause they're
a
the
212.
OEM.
Yes. But they won't sell them in individual steps.
Bastards.
Okay, which is okay, because if you look at that, well, these are in millimeters, those are in inches, so it's kind of hard to put the two together. But each one of those, like the 5 or in the next one the 0, will put you in the spec. It's usually never a case where you won't be able to get a shim that'll fit you within the spec,
Got it.
even if you only have, ending in 5 or ending in 0.
Right.
So that goes there, that goes there. I'm going to close this so we don't lose anything. Back to what I was saying, the smile that came on my face. So when those numbers are worn away, you have to measure each one of those shims.
Gross.
We don't have the tool in this shop to measure that.
That's a tiny number.
Because the numbers are so fine, you can't use what we would use for our small measurements is that veneer caliper. What you need to measure these is a micrometer.
So to do the adjustment, the valve adjustment, we're gonna need to order the kit and a micrometer.
Okay, so let's get back to that.
Yes.
We're still stuck on this, okay? So you either buy a kit or you take all your shims out, you measure them all, okay?
Okay.
And then you look at your spec and you see you need to go thicker or thinner. Right, so
see.
let's say that the shim that we pull out of cylinder 1, exhaust number 1, let's say the shim that comes out of here is a 200.
Okay.
Okay, if we put a 210 in there, that should put us right in that spec. If we
see.
put a 205 in there, we'll probably be right at that tight edge, and we may want to go up to the next one. Once you get your sizes,
Right.
you measure all your shims, you know that each one of these shims has to be a +1 or a +2 sizes. Then you take your little piece of paper with all your shim sizes that you need +1 or however much bigger you need them. You go to your dealership and you say, I need shims for this bike in these sizes.
Okay.
Now, usually, God, I hope your local dealership will have multiple shim kits in stock.
In stock there at the store.
Because
because all the Japanese
service
are got it.
service needs it. You know what I mean? So the service department is going to need to have that stuff inspected. You don't want to take this thing apart and then set it in a corner while you order shims.
Right.
That's the last thing you want to do.
Gotcha.
You want to take this thing apart and you want to swap the shims out and you want to put it back together, especially if you're doing a service on someone's bike. You want to take your bike in for service. You don't want it to be there for 2 weeks.
Right.
You want it to be there for a day or 2.
Okay.
So if they had to order shims, it's going to take some time. So for your Japanese machines, I'm going to slam Ducati here for a second. For your Japanese shims,
It looks like good.
like I said, they only do a couple of sizes, you know, and that's going to fit 20 years of machines.
Whew.
Okay, so I would be confident in saying that a 2000 CBR 600 F4 shims are the same diameter as a 2020 CBR 600RR.
That would be very nice.
You know what I mean?
mechanically, yeah.
So everything in between there, all those shims will fit in the motor.
Got it.
Now there are other manufacturers that have a tendency to change their designs over time, and you wind up with different styles of shim and different shapes of shims. In that case, sometimes you might need to order 1 or 2.
And you're gonna have to order it, and it's gonna.
Everything's going to sit apart until everything gets there. So, you know, if your service department is incredibly fantastic, they'll have all the shims in stock, but that's very rare right now, unless it's like, there are so many dealerships out there that are 4 lines or more. To carry more than 4 lines worth of maintenance parts at all times is very difficult.
Is that one of the reasons you see dealerships focus on just a couple model lines, like brands?
Their service department, yes. If they're focused on their service department, then you'll only carry so many lines.
Got it.
Because from a technician standpoint, to try and memorize how to do things on 6 different brands of machine, super difficult.
Yeah.
You know, and when you're working as a flat rate technician, you don't want to have to go to the book all the time. You want to be able to have that stuff memorized and then go to the book for specific things like specs.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to be like, damn, I don't remember how this thing comes apart.
Right.
You know, and it happens when you work in a big dealership, and it kills your clock.
And that's your money.
And that's your money. If you got 4 jobs in a day and every job you roll up on your lift is a different manufacturer, it's just a different set of tools.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So you roll up bike 1, you do your job, you put everything away. You roll up bike 2, you do your job, put everything away. If you do 4 Yamahas in a row, you take your tools out once until the end of the day and then you put them all away.
That is a perspective I would not have thought about.
You know, so for those guys out in the world that are working in multi-line dealerships, I give it to you, bro. I know your pain, and more power to you. And I hope you love what you do. You know, because if you don't, you're going to want to stab yourself in the eyeball on a daily basis. So that is a valve inspection on an inline 4-cylinder DOHC.
Dual overhead cam.
Shim under bucket engine.
Shim under bucket engine. I understand the majority of what you said.
Hopefully now a whole bunch more people out there understand what we're talking about now too.
So hopefully you guys have a much better understanding now of what a valve inspection and a valve adjustment looks like on a motorcycle. We're gonna handle the adjustment part on the next episode of Wrecked Bike Rebuild Garage. Thank you guys for watching. If you got to the end of the video, power to you. Thank you so much. And I think that's all we got. I'm very happy to see where the 600 is. We've got the 300 engine was total useless. Had to get a whole new one. The CBR 1000 engine, for you guys that aren't caught up with the rest of the engines,
Is a boat anchor.
is a boat anchor that we're on total rebuild status, so it's really good. I mean, it's shocking that those engines were running, which says a lot to Honda.
At least the 300 for sure.
The 300.
The 1000 was still within that running range, but it went around for much longer.
Right, so it is a huge relief for us and all of our Patreon supporter guys to see that we actually have an engine that has good news about it. Again, if you guys are interested in helping support the show, you get episodes weeks early and you get to help us decide what we're doing with these builds. Make sure to check out Patreon at the top link down below. It is how we are able to do this show. We will see you guys on the next one. Outro crew. How many of you guys have ever inspected or adjusted your own valves?
How about that? That'd be interesting to see what kind of knowledge base we've got. Also, if you guys are in the outro crew, make sure to put OC in your comment. All right, guys. Team Behind and I are out. We'll see you guys on the next one. Later.